Lil Durk just got a huge ruling days before his murder-for-hire trial, and it could completely change his chances of walking free. But even more surprising is Quando Rondo's reaction, because the man prosecutors say Durk wanted dead isn't responding the way anyone expected. Here's what's happening. Let's start with what actually happened, because it's the reason everyone's talking. On February 13, 2026, U.S. District Judge Michael W. Fitzgerald handed down what's being described as a mixed verdict on one of the most contentious pre-trial fights. In Lil Durk's murder-for-hire case, a split decision that contained big wins for the prosecution, but also a few major victories for the rapper. This wasn't the final verdict on guilt. This was the fight over what a jury would even get to see, and it was massive. Here's the setup. Prosecutors wanted to include excerpts of a dozen songs, 9 music videos, and 3 audio files. Durk's legal team, led by attorney Drew Findling, vehemently objected. Think about that for a second. The government wanted to use Durk's own music, his lyrics, his videos as proof of motive and intent in a murder case. His lawyers fought back hard, calling it a fundamental threat to the case. The judge didn't hand either side a clean win. When it came to music videos, the judge ruled that in most cases, screenshots would suffice instead of the videos themselves, since one of the reasons for inclusion was to show relationships between people in the videos. That's a compromise nobody was fully happy with. The prosecution got their images in front of the jury, but they lost the moving footage they wanted. Then, just a week before the trial doors opened, the ruling that really lit up group chats and comment sections came down. On August 13, 2026, a federal judge ruled that the rapper's video and lyrics for his hit single Pissed Me Off can be used as evidence. Durk's team fought that one too, arguing it would create so much risk of prejudice and confusion. They lost. Prosecutors got exactly what they wanted on that track, arguing the song shows Durk's resolve to avenge the death of his friend and protege Davon King Von Bennett. So here's where things stand right as the trial gets underway. Durk's team scored a genuine win earlier in the summer. On July 14, 2026, Lil Durk scored a major victory when a judge ruled his gang racketeering charge would be severed from his upcoming murder-for-hire trial. That's a big deal. It meant the jury hearing his case wouldn't be hearing about an entirely separate alleged criminal enterprise while deciding on the murder-for-hire charge. Findling told reporters at the time, "We are very happy with the court's order. For 21 months, we have been unwavering in our commitment to Mr. Banks and his innocence, and we look forward to an Aug 20, 2026 trial." But then, days before opening arguments, prosecutors swung back. They filed a 4th superseding indictment in California federal court that expands the charges facing the Grammy-winning Chicago rapper and his co-defendants. The stakes on the table now are as high as they get in the American legal system. The charges against Durk, including conspiracy, murder for hire resulting in death, and violent crimes in aid of racketeering, carry a mandatory sentence of life in federal prison if convicted. Now, where does Quando Rondo fit into all this? He's not a defendant. He's not even required to testify, but he's the reason any of this exists. Federal prosecutors say the intended target was Tyquan Terrell Bowman, known as Quando Rondo, whom Banks allegedly blamed for the 2020 shooting death of his friend and protege, Davon King Von Bennett. Rondo has been watching this legal chess match play out for nearly 2 years, and he hasn't stayed silent. Not long after Durk's initial arrest, Rondo posted a message that stunned fans, a public statement of forgiveness toward a man accused of trying to have him killed. That reaction, and the ones that followed it, are a huge part of why this case carries so much weight beyond the courtroom. We're going to get into exactly what he said, and how his tone has shifted since. But first, you need to understand how 2 of drill music's most recognizable names ended up on opposite sides of an execution-style shooting in the first place. To understand why a federal judge is deciding evidence rulings that could put a Grammy winner away for life, you have to go back to a nightclub parking lot in Atlanta in November 2020. That's where King Von, Lil Durk's close friend, protege, and fellow OTF artist, was shot and killed following an altercation. Quando Rondo was there that night. He survived. Von didn't. From that moment, the 2 camps were locked into something far beyond a typical rap beef. Federal prosecutors allege the shooting outside that Atlanta club is the spark that lit everything that came after. The 2022 murder of Quando's cousin, Saviaya Robinson, also known as Lil Pab. reportedly as retaliation for the 2020 killing of King Von, a close associate of Lil Durk. The retaliation prosecutors described wasn't subtle. On August 19, 2022, gunmen allegedly tracked Quando Rondo down in Los Angeles. According to the government's account, the gunmen tracked Bowman to Los Angeles and ambushed him at a gas station near the Beverly Center, firing at least 18 rounds from multiple weapons, including a machine gun. 18 rounds in broad daylight near one of the busiest shopping centers in the city. Rondo wasn't hit, but Bowman's cousin, Saviaya Robinson, was struck and killed while standing outside a black Escalade linked to Bowman, according to the government. A young woman killed in a shooting prosecutors say was never meant for her at all. She just happened to be standing near the man the gunmen were actually after. For 2 years, nobody was arrested in connection with ordering that hit. Then, in October 2024, everything changed. Lil Durk was detained while trying to leave the country. According to the federal case, Durk, who was arrested in October 2024 near Miami International Airport, while attempting to board an international flight, has remained held without bail. A separate account from Billboard adds more texture to how prosecutors frame the mechanics of the alleged plot. Banks, they say, used coded language to hire a group of alleged hitmen to travel to Los Angeles and carry out an execution-style killing in broad daylight on August 19, 2022. Durk wasn't arrested alone. Federal agents also picked up several men connected to his label. Banks was arrested in Broward County, Florida on October 17, 2024, along with 5 of his associates from OTF. The government's theory of the case doesn't stop at one bad decision made in the heat of grief over a friend's murder. Investigators built a much bigger picture, alleging that Banks conspired with his OTF associates to murder Bowman and offered a monetary reward for his murder, and that Banks used funds from himself and OTF-related ventures to finance the conspiracy. And prosecutors didn't stop with just the one shooting. Court filings go further, suggesting this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Documents show that Banks was suspected of being involved with several murders and attempted murders, most notably the January 2022 murder of Stefan Mack, a member of a rival gang. That particular allegation, the Chicago killing, became its own separate battleground in the pretrial fighting, which we'll get to. The label itself, Only the Family, became part of the government's core argument. Rather than treating OTF purely as a record label and creative collective, prosecutors reframed it as something else entirely in their indictment, alleging that OTF was operated as a criminal enterprise, offering rewards of money and music opportunities in exchange for murdering rivals of Banks. Durk wasn't facing this alone in the courtroom either. Several OTF associates named in the indictment, including Kevon London Grant and DeAndre Dontrell Wilson, face matching federal counts as the defense prepares for a protracted trial in Los Angeles. That group dynamic is exactly why the case dragged on as long as it did before ever reaching a jury, because separating out 4 or 5 defendants' individual rights and defenses from one another is its own legal minefield, one that produced round after round of motions before anybody even got to opening statements. From the outside, this looked like a straightforward case. Shooting happens, victim's family and prosecutors build a case. Arrest follows, trial follows, but anyone who followed the actual timeline knows it was anything but straightforward. The road from that October 2024 arrest to an actual trial date took almost 2 full years, and the fights over jury selection, evidence, and even which charges would be heard together turned into a legal saga of their own. If you've been following this case even loosely, you've probably noticed the trial date kept moving. That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just paperwork. Every delay came with a fight attached to it, and every fight tells you something about how high the stakes had gotten. The first sign of how contentious this would be came in late February 2026, when co-defendants tried to break away from Durk's case entirely. Their lawyers argued that being tried alongside Durk exposed them to prejudice they didn't deserve. The judge disagreed. U.S. District Judge Michael W. Fitzgerald ruled that the case would proceed jointly and set a new trial date of August 20, 2026. That ruling meant something significant for Durk specifically. It meant more time behind bars before he'd even get a chance to argue his case to a jury. As one report put it, the decision meant the Grammy-winning rapper, whose legal name is Durk Banks, would remain in custody without bail for an additional 4 months before reaching a jury. His trial, originally on the calendar for April, had just been pushed to August. Durk's team wasn't quiet about the frustration. They wanted this over. They'd been asking for an earlier date, not a later one, given how long their client had already sat in custody. But the delays kept coming, largely because prosecutors kept adding to the case. In early June 2026, federal prosecutors dropped a bombshell nobody was fully expecting this close to trial. A brand new, extremely serious charge, reporting on the escalation, described it as a bombshell new racketeering murder charge as federal prosecutors tacked on charges at the midnight hour. In their case, against the Grammy-winning artist. That charge tied back to the Chicago allegations, the January 2022 killing that had been floating around the edges of the case for months. Durk's defense called foul immediately. His lawyers had spent nearly 2 years building a defense strategy around the Los Angeles allegations specifically. And now the government wanted to fold in an entirely different killing in an entirely different city, right before jury selection. His attorneys didn't hold back in their public response, previously describing the whole approach as lipstick on a pig, and insisting their client's innocence remained untouched by the new filing. That set up one of the tensest hearings of the entire pretrial process. In mid-July, Durk's legal team, a group that included Findling alongside attorneys Christy O'Connor, Marissa Goldberg, and Brian Steele, the same lawyer who represented Young Thug during the YSL racketeering trial, showed up outside the Los Angeles courthouse, waiting on a ruling that could reshape the entire case. Inside, Judge Fitzgerald grilled prosecutors directly, at one point asking pointedly why they'd waited so long to bring charges tied to the January 2022 Chicago killing. If they felt so strongly about the connection, he didn't let them off easy, telling lead prosecutor Ian Ianniello during the hearing that adding the Chicago count to the Los Angeles case would obviously improve the government's odds of winning, and that you think you will have a better chance to win if the Chicago count is tried with the Los Angeles murder. That's obvious. You treat that as a feature. By the end of that day, the judge sided with the defense. He severed the newly added charges, ruling that a separate January 2022 killing in Chicago and an alleged February 2019 attempted murder in Atlanta would be off-limits at Durk's Aug 20 trial in downtown Los Angeles, because prosecutors introduced them only last month in a third superseding indictment. The Los Angeles case would move forward exactly as originally framed. The Chicago allegations and the racketeering enterprise theory would wait for another day, another jury, another trial entirely. That win came with a real cost, though. Every delay meant more months in a cell for a man who hadn't been convicted of anything. And just when the defense thought they had clarity on what jury would hear what, prosecutors filed yet again. The fourth superseding indictment landed only days before trial, once more expanding the scope of what Durk was accused of, even after the severed charges had already been pulled out. Then there was the question of who would even be sitting in the jury box. Given the nature of the allegations, witness intimidation, retaliatory violence, a criminal enterprise theory, prosecutors took the unusual step of asking for anonymity protections for the panel. Court filings noted prosecutors said they would ask the court to grant anonymity to the 16 jurors chosen for the Aug 20 trial, citing security concerns. That's not a request judges grant lightly. It signals that both sides expect this case to draw serious public attention, and that the government believes jurors need protection simply for agreeing to serve. All of that, the delays, the added charges, the anonymous jury, the severed counts, is why the evidentiary rulings covered earlier landed with so much weight. Every single decision Judge Fitzgerald made in these final weeks wasn't just a technical ruling. It was a signal of which direction 14 months of legal combat was finally tipping. And through every single one of these developments, one man who wasn't sitting at either legal table was watching from the outside, deciding how and whether to respond. Quando Rondo's first public reaction to any of this didn't come with anger. It came with something a lot of fans didn't expect: forgiveness. Just after news broke of Durk's arrest, Rondo posted a message on Instagram that immediately went viral for how measured it was. He wrote in part that we didn't get into this music industry to make it just to stay caught up in this street stat. We all have families and communities counting on us. It's time to leave all that behind. We've already lost so much, and it's heavy on my heart to forgive anyone I had issues with in the past. It's all love from me. That message landed differently depending on who was reading it. Coverage at the time noted fans were split on the message, with some praising the maturity and others questioning the timing. Think about the position Rondo was in. His own cousin had been killed. Federal prosecutors were now saying, in writing, that he himself had been the actual target of that shooting. And instead of coming out swinging, he chose a message about letting go of the streets entirely. Rondo's reaction didn't stop at one Instagram post, though. Over the following months, he kept engaging with the story in different ways. Sometimes through interviews, sometimes through his own music, sometimes reacting directly to footage and updates as they surfaced. One widely circulated video showed him responding in real time to footage connected to Durk's detention, a moment that fans clipped and shared across platforms because of how raw it felt. Watching Rondo process the news of the man accused of trying to kill him now sitting behind bars himself. He also opened up at length in a sit-down interview, one recorded specifically because Rondo couldn't travel freely. The producers behind that conversation explained the unusual setup themselves, noting they went to Savannah, Georgia to sit with Quando, who couldn't travel due to stipulations put in place by a judge in his current indictment. Even Rondo himself has had his own separate legal complications limiting his movement, which made the fact that he was willing to sit down and talk through everything, his relationship with Durk, the shooting, the aftermath, even more notable to fans who'd been trying to read his mood for months. What stood out most to people following this closely is the contrast between Rondo's public tone and the sheer weight of what prosecutors allege happened to him. This is a man the federal government says was hunted down and shot at 18 times outside a gas station, and yet the words he's chosen publicly have leaned toward closure rather than retribution. His forgiveness statement specifically referenced wanting to leave that street life behind for the sake of family and community, not calls for revenge, not public feuding, not doubling down on the beef that fueled years of tension between his camp and Durk's. That doesn't mean Rondo has stayed entirely removed from the case as it's unfolded. He's continued to be referenced constantly in every filing, every hearing, every piece of coverage, because legally, he's the intended victim at the heart of the entire prosecution. Every time Judge Fitzgerald ruled on a piece of evidence, every time prosecutors added another charge, Rondo's name was attached to the reasoning. The government's own descriptions of the alleged plot keep circling back to him specifically. One outlet summarized it plainly. Federal prosecutors say the shooting was part of a murder-for-hire plot targeting Quando Rondo in retaliation for the 2020 killing of King Von, one of Durk's close friends and collaborators. There's also a strange symmetry sitting underneath all of this that fans have picked up on. Durk built part of his defense case around lyrics and videos. The same piss me off record prosecutors say reflects his motive is, in part, about grieving King Von. Rondo, meanwhile, has spent the better part of 2 years being simultaneously the reason that record exists, the survivor of the shooting the record allegedly foreshadows, and the man whose public statement of forgiveness now sits in stark contrast to the version of events prosecutors are asking a jury to believe. As the trial date approached, that contrast only got sharper. Here's a defendant walking into a Los Angeles courtroom facing a mandatory life sentence if convicted. And here's the man he allegedly tried to have killed, having already told the world months earlier that it was all love from him. Whatever verdict eventually comes out of that courtroom, Rondo's reaction to it, whether it echoes the forgiveness of his earlier statement or shifts into something new, is going to carry weight far beyond a typical hip-hop story. It's the reaction of a survivor watching the legal system decide the fate of the man accused of ending his life. As jury selection got underway and both legal teams prepared their opening arguments, the picture that emerged wasn't the clean, decisive story either side probably wanted heading into trial. It was a mess of split rulings, last-minute charges, and a defense team that had spent nearly 2 years fighting the government to a stalemate on more than one front. Consider where things actually stood the moment testimony was set to begin. Durk's team had already banked a real win by getting the racketeering enterprise theory and the Chicago-related allegations severed out of the Los Angeles case entirely. That meant the jury deciding his fate on the Beverly Center shooting wouldn't hear about the broader criminal enterprise theory prosecutors were building, or about Stefan Mack, or about the alleged 2019 Atlanta attempted murder. Those allegations would have to wait for a separate trial down the road. But prosecutors had answered that loss by doing exactly what frustrated the defense from the start, filing again. The fourth superseding indictment, dropped just days before opening statements, meant the scope of what jurors would hear had shifted right up until the last possible moment. And on the evidence front, the defense had lost the fight that mattered most. The pissed me off video and lyrics were staying in. Jurors would hear prosecutors argue that Durk's own music reflected a documented desire for revenge tied directly to King Von's death. The emotional through line, the government was building its entire motive theory around that combination, a severed racketeering theory, but an admitted motive-heavy song. A defense win on jury composition concerns, but a government win on emotional evidence, is exactly why so many people following the case have called the run-up to trial unpredictable in a way few expected. Neither side walked into the Los Angeles courtroom with a clean hand. Both sides had real ammunition and real vulnerabilities heading into opening arguments. For Durk personally, the stakes could not be higher. He'd already spent close to 2 years in custody without bail, watching his trial date get pushed from October to January to April, and finally to August. A jury trial for Durk and his 3 co-defendants had been repeatedly pushed back, first from October to January, then to April, each time over Durk's objections. Every delay meant more time behind bars for a man who, at every stage, maintained his innocence and pushed for an earlier date rather than a later one. His legal team never wavered from that position publicly. Findling reiterated it again just weeks before trial, telling reporters that on behalf of Banks, we are fully prepared to proceed to trial. That's the posture Durk's camp held on to through every setback. A defendant and a legal team insisting they wanted this in front of a jury as fast as possible, even while prosecutors kept adding new layers to the case right up until the trial doors opened. And for the co-defendants swept up alongside him, men like Kayvon London, Grant and DeAndre Dontrell Wilson, the stakes are nearly identical. They're not facing this as bystanders, they're facing the same murder for hire and violent crime allegations tied to the same August 2022 shooting, walking into the same Los Angeles courtroom. What makes this case different from a typical celebrity legal drama isn't just the fame of the man on trial. It's the fact that the alleged intended victim is himself a prominent figure in the exact same music scene, someone whose own public reaction has shaped how millions of fans have processed this story from the outside. Quando Rondo didn't need to say a word publicly for this case to matter, but he did say something repeatedly, and that choice to lean toward forgiveness rather than retaliation has become as much a part of this story as any court filing. As the trial moves forward from here, both families, Durk's and the family of Saviaya Robinson, the young woman killed in that 2022 shooting, are left waiting on the same outcome. A jury now holds the answer to a question that's been building since a nightclub parking lot in Atlanta back in 2020. Whether a grief-driven feud between 2 of drill music's most recognizable names crossed the line into a federal murder-for-hire conspiracy, or whether the government's 4 superseding indictments and years of escalating charges amount to more than they can actually prove in front of 12 strangers. Either way, the reaction's already on record. Durk's insistence on his innocence, his legal team's repeated victories on severance and jury protections, and Rondo's public choice to forgive rather than fight are going to be measured against whatever verdict eventually comes down. And given how unpredictable every single ruling in this case has been up to this point, nobody watching is confident they know which way it's going to go.